Are local models finally good? So recently, Hugging Face CEO posted this. A study out of Stanford, he says, found 71% of the questions people ask ChatGPT could be answered by models running locally. And his read was that if this is true, then a big chunk of enterprise AI could just move locally and run for free instead of paying frontier model cost. Now, this is directionally correct. However, there is a lot to what constitutes a local model. But before that, we actually need to look at what exactly that 71% is. In this case, they compared two different local models and used an LLM as a judge. So if the local model won or they tied together, that was considered as a win compared to proprietary models. Now, for any simple queries that you ask ChatGPT, these local models are now good enough. The question is whether you can use them for serious work and what exactly even make a local model. Now, to answer this, think of yourself as a developer who is building an application on top of these large language models, which are hosted because you need higher level of intelligence. But the problem is you don't own them. You can't freeze it in place. The company behind it can change it both in terms of the weights, the price, or retire it altogether. And that is a big problem for anybody who is building on top of proprietary models, because even if they simply update, the model behavior can change. Now, one of a perfect example of this was Fable 5, which was released on June 9. A couple of days after that, they had to take it down because of government export control. Now it's back online. However, I think it's a real worry that people are going to have. These companies may or they might be forced to take down models or change their behavior. Now, this is where open models are extremely critical. However, when you see the word open, it doesn't always mean what you think. For example, open weight is not the same as open source. The best models often are not open at all. And even when the model is open, it doesn't always mean you are allowed to use it. On top of that, the exact same file can behave very differently depending on who is running it. So just go local quietly turns into 5 separate questions that you need to answer. What local even means, what open actually buys you, how the model gets served, who really controls it, and who pays for it. Now, the thing is that all of these are connected. So if you get any one of them wrong, going local actually solves nothing for you. Now, in this video, I want to talk about these things because these are critical when we are talking about open models, especially the capable ones. Okay, so when people talk about local models, I like to divide them into 3 different parts or categories. The first tier is small models, which I would say up to 35 billion parameter. These are the ones that you could potentially run on local hardware. And this is the tier people picture when they hear local AI. The second tier is the mid-size models, a few hundred billion parameters. These do not fit on your local computers, laptops, or desktops. Now, you need a small cluster of data center GPUs, which almost nobody owns. So you are basically renting these. And the third tier is the giants, say DeepSeek's 1.6 trillion parameter. You can download the whole thing for free right now, and there's still no way you can actually run it. It's going to take a cluster of GPUs, especially H100s or B100s. Now, if you look at it, the only first tier is actually completely local. The second and third tiers are basically for businesses or enterprises. Now, if you're looking at the higher tiers, they get really expensive really quickly. And even though if these are local models, you don't really have control on the data that you're passing it on and it's generating. And let me explain that. Now, before that, we need to talk about the licensing because it's a wild, wild west right now. It can go from do whatever you want to do not dare at all. Okay, so let's talk about some of them which are pretty genuinely clean. The DeepSeeks and GLMs of the world today, they usually ship with MIT license, which means you can use it for commercial purposes if you can run this. The second tier is companies like Kimi, who are shipping models that can be used for commercial purposes, you need to give them credit, which means something like you need to show their name inside your product, so if you're using them. And then there are other models like Minimax, which went from a free license to a very convoluted non-commercial license. Now they allow you to use it for commercial purposes, but you need to actually sign an agreement with them. And then you have Qwen. Qwen started as a really awesome open weight models lab, but now they are closing their most capable models more and more. So you really need to pick which model you're going to be able to use for commercial purposes based on their licensing. So it's not just about capabilities anymore. Now, one thing I want to make sure that is clear, that I'm not against these companies making money, because it takes a lot of effort and money to train these models. So if you are making millions of dollars, it's probably better to pay a part of that to these frontier model creators. No, creating these models is just one part of the story. The biggest thing is, how exactly do you use them? Because depending on the service or inference provider you choose, the same model is going to give you very, very different results. So for example, if somebody's serving it in full precision with correct template, you're going to get great results. However, a lot of inference providers use quantized versions of these models, sometimes with wrong templates. And the results that you see from these capable open models are subpar. So you really need to think about the service or inference provider, because that is going to define not only the experience that you get, but also the cost you are going to be incurring. Now, with inference providers, you don't really have control on your data. So again, it's as bad as using a proprietary API endpoint if you don't read their terms of services correctly. And this control can be represented as a ladder. At the very bottom of this is closed APIs. You have zero control, and as the Fable scenario shows us, the whole thing can vanish out from under you overnight. Now, one rung up, you have open models, but through someone else's API. Now, at least you have the license on your side. The catch is that the serving can still disappear or quietly change underneath you. Now, higher up, you can self-host these models on rented GPUs, and now you can freeze the exact version and keep it forever, which is pretty great if you want to serve frontier level open weight models. At the very top, you can run it on your own hardware and you have absolute control. Now, another thing that you need to think about is the economics of these open models, not only from serving, but for the people or the companies that are creating these models. And this, I think, piece is going to be extremely worrying for the future of open weight. Let me explain. The economics of open models are completely backward. For proprietary models, these companies spend billions of dollars to train the model, and then they make the money by serving these models. Now, when it comes to open models, they actually do the same thing, but then they make those models weight open. And usually you see that a lot of these inference provider will take these open weights and serve it to people. They're the ones that are actually making money. If you look at companies like DeepSeek, they have their own inference. However, Western companies do not want to use that inference API endpoint. Now, mostly the open models are basically a driver for advertisement and bringing in specialized businesses. But one of the biggest problems with open weight right now is lack of ecosystem. Proprietary models, creators can create ecosystems around their models. When it comes to open models, there are way too many right now. And we haven't actually seen a good ecosystem around these models. Now, the question is, if you are relying on somebody else's inference for open models, it's basically using proprietary models. In this case, I would actually use a routing mechanism where you use local workhorse models for most of your tasks and then send the more intelligence bearing tasks to frontier closed source models. This is a pattern that I'm seeing a lot of companies are adopting, because it not only reduces their cost, but also gives them better performance in terms of latency. Now, the question I often get is, what are the easy tasks? If you think about agentic coding. For long-running tasks, you want to use frontier models as an orchestrator, planner, and for execution, you can actually use capable open models or even smaller workhorse models. And this combination, especially with models like GLM 5.2, is going to not only save you money, but you're going to get a boost in latency reduction. Now, one thing which a lot of people don't really talk about is that running these models locally on your own servers is not cheap. Because if you're paying per token, it is actually cheap to start with. And the bill is going to scale with how much you're using. Now, on the other hand, if you're running your own GPUs, they are going to cost you a fortune just sitting there idle. Now, they only win at a high steady volume when the machines stay busy. Below this line, which is where most of us are going to live, the pay per token API is cheaper option. Owning the hardware is a controlled decision, not actually a serving one. And this is more realistic for companies or businesses that they want to control. So I want to come back to this question, can you rely on local models and is it yours? And the honest answer is mostly yes, as long as you stop framing it as a local instead of the frontier. So you want to route the easy work to your local models, keep the frontier for the harder stuff, and hold the weights for the model that matters so that when the next fable happens, you are the one holding off the switch. Anyways, do let me know your thoughts, whether you agree or disagree with me. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you in the next one.